The early morning mist hovered over the rushing river as Daniel, a seasoned fisherman, stood ankle-deep in the icy water, casting his line with precision. It was his favorite time of day, silent, serene, and untouched by the world. The rhythmic splash of the current against smooth river stones was the only sound accompanying his solitary adventure. The forest behind him stood still, save for the occasional rustling of branches from birds and small creatures waking to the dawn. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the crisp mountain air, and reeled in a glistening trout. Just as he was about to toss it into his woven basket, a sound from the tree line made him pause, a heavy rustling, followed by a deep, guttural huff. His heart pounded. He turned, gripping the knife at his belt, and froze. A massive brown bear stood at the riverbank, its fur damp with morning dew, its dark eyes locked onto him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. But something was wrong. The bear wasn't charging, nor did it appear aggressive. Instead, it hesitated, lifting one paw slightly before dropping it again, as if struggling to decide whether to approach. Daniel held his ground, adrenaline surging through his veins. The bear let out a deep, mournful groan, a sound more of exhaustion than threat, and then, astonishingly, it lowered itself onto its belly, extending a paw slightly forward as if pleading. It wasn't a gesture Daniel had ever seen from a wild animal before. He had encountered bears before, but never like this. He knew the rule, never feed wild animals. But there was something in the bear's posture, its desperate, almost sorrowful gaze, that made him hesitate. Against every instinct, he reached into his basket and pulled out a fish, tossing it cautiously a few feet in front of the bear. It didn't lunge for it. Instead, it sniffed the fish, then looked back at Daniel, letting out another huff, almost a sigh of relief. Slowly, it took the fish in its powerful jaws, chewed and swallowed, but rather than turn away, it remained. It wasn't satisfied. The bear let out another low groan, this time nudging closer, its gaze never leaving Daniel's face. His pulse quickened. The bear was begging. Not stealing, not hunting, begging. Daniel had read stories of animals behaving strangely, but never had he expected to witness something like this. It was clear now. The bear wasn't just hungry. It was desperate. Starvation didn't make bears act this way. Something else was wrong. His mind raced with possibilities. Had the bear been injured? Was it unable to hunt? Or worse, was something bigger happening in the depths of the forest? Whatever the case, the bear wasn't here by accident. It needed help. Hesitating only a moment longer, Daniel reached into his basket, pulled out another fish, and tossed it closer. This time, the bear devoured it quickly but did not move away. Instead, it turned its head slightly, letting out a short, sharp grunt, as if urging him to follow. The hairs on the back of Daniel's neck stood up. Something wasn't right. The bear wasn't here just for food. It wanted something more. Against all logic, against all survival instincts screaming at him to back away, he gripped his basket and took a slow, careful step forward. The bear rose onto its massive legs, watching him intently, then turned and began to walk toward the trees. It was leading him somewhere, and deep in his gut, Daniel knew he had to follow. Daniel hesitated as he watched the massive bear disappear between the thick, towering trees. His heartbeat was erratic, a mixture of fear and raw curiosity battling within him. He knew he should turn back, that following a bear, especially one acting so strangely, was against every survival instinct he had. But something about the way it had looked at him, the desperation in its eyes, made it impossible for him to walk away. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted the strap of his basket, grabbed his hunting knife from his belt just in case, and stepped onto the damp forest floor, trailing the bear into the unknown. The deeper he ventured, the more the air changed. The scent of pine and wet earth was soon laced with something more pungent, something foul and unnatural. A sense of unease crawled up his spine, making the hair on the back of his neck prickle. The bear moved at a steady pace, never too fast, never out of sight, but it didn't stop or glance back. It was leading him with purpose. The forest canopy grew denser, sunlight filtering through in sparse patches, casting long, flickering shadows. The usual sounds of wildlife, chirping birds, rustling squirrels, the distant hoots of owls, were eerily absent. The silence was thick, oppressive, unnatural. Daniel pressed forward, his boots crunching on twigs and damp leaves. He wasn't sure how long they had been walking, but his legs were starting to ache. Just as he was about to consider turning back, the bear suddenly stopped. It stood still, ears perked, body tense, as if listening for something. Daniel instinctively crouched low, gripping his knife tighter. Then, without warning, the bear let out a deep, guttural growl. Not at him, but towards something ahead. The forest seemed to respond. A distant noise, a crack, a shuffle, echoed through the trees. Daniel held his breath, his pulse roaring in his ears. Was it another animal? A predator? Something about the bear's posture told him this wasn't a casual encounter. It was on edge, alert, ready for danger. Slowly, the bear continued forward, but its movements were more cautious now. Daniel followed, his senses heightened, scanning the trees for any sign of threat. And then, through the thinning trees ahead, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. The ground abruptly dipped into a small clearing, where the earth had been disturbed, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. Broken branches, deep claw marks in the dirt, and dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood, were scattered across the area. His grip on the knife tightened. Something bad had happened here. The bear let out another low rumble, stepping cautiously forward, sniffing the air. Daniel followed its gaze and spotted something just beyond the disturbed ground, a large, jagged opening in the earth, like a cave entrance, partially hidden by overgrown foliage. He swallowed hard. The bear turned to him, its eyes dark and filled with an emotion Daniel couldn't quite place. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't hunger. It was almost pleading. Then, before he could react, the bear turned and lumbered into the cave. Daniel exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Was this a trap? A den? But the bear had had every opportunity to attack him, and it hadn't. It had led him here for a reason. Steeling himself, he took a cautious step forward and peered into the darkness. The smell hit him first, rot, decay, and something sickly sweet, like flesh left to decompose. He fought the urge to gag. The cave walls were rough, damp, and lined with claw marks, some deep enough to suggest a desperate struggle. His fingers brushed against something near the entrance, a piece of torn fabric. His breath caught. It wasn't animal fur. It was a piece of clothing. A human had been here. A deep sense of dread settled in his gut. He glanced at the bear, who was now staring deeper into the cave, its ears flattened, body tense. Then, from the depths of the cave, a sound emerged, a low, raspy, wheezing breath. Daniel froze. Something was inside. With each slow step forward, his vision adjusted to the dimness. His boots crunched on scattered bones, some small, some far too large to belong to any forest creature. The deeper he went, the more his stomach twisted. The cave walls bore scratches, not from an animal, but from fingers, nails dragging desperately against the stone. Then he saw it. A figure lay curled in the farthest corner of the cave, barely more than a shadow against the jagged walls. Daniel's breath hitched. It was a child, a girl, no older than 8 or 9, her body frail, her face smudged with dirt and dried blood. Her clothes were tattered, barely clinging to her skeletal frame. She didn't move at first, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. For a moment, Daniel feared he was too late. But then, her eyes fluttered open, barely focused, filled with terror. She tried to recoil, but there was no strength left in her body. She was exhausted, dehydrated, on the verge of death. Daniel dropped his knife, hands shaking. Hey, it's okay?" he whispered, kneeling beside her, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "I'm here to help." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The bear let out a low, rumbling huff behind him, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. Daniel's mind was a storm of questions. How had she ended up here? Who had left her? And why had the bear, a creature of the wild, led him to her? But before he could dwell on the answers, he realized something even more chilling. The bear wasn't just guiding him, it was guarding her. Something else had put her here, and whatever it was might still be close. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached out toward the frail girl. The cave was suffocating, the air thick with the scent of decay, and something far worse, something primal. He could feel it pressing against his chest, a weight of unseen dread that made every breath a struggle. The girl's lips were dry and cracked, her body shivering despite the cave's stagnant warmth. She wasn't just weak, she was on the brink of death. The bear, standing behind him, let out a deep, guttural exhale, watching closely as if assessing the situation. It had led him here, but why? Why would a wild animal care about a human child? The pieces didn't fit together, but there was no time for questioning. He needed to get her out of there. "Hey!" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding in his ears. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyelids fluttered, her unfocused eyes darting toward him. There was fear in them, but more than that, there was exhaustion, an unbearable, soul-deep exhaustion that spoke of suffering far beyond her young years. He needed to move fast. Kneeling down, he carefully slid his arms beneath her fragile body. She barely weighed anything, her bones pressing through the thin fabric of her torn clothes. The moment he lifted her, she let out a weak whimper, her body stiffening as if expecting pain. His jaw clenched. What had happened to her? Then, just as he turned toward the cave entrance, the bear growled. Not at him, at something else. Daniel froze. His grip on the girl tightened. The bear's posture had shifted, its muscles tensed, its ears pinned back. It wasn't just standing guard, it was protecting them. A sound echoed through the cave, a slow, deliberate scraping. Daniel's blood turned to ice. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees shifting outside. Something was in the cave with them. The girl trembled in his arms, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She tried to lift a hand, her fingers weakly gripping his shirt. "H's," her voice was a whisper, barely there. Daniel's stomach clenched. "Who?" But before she could answer, a noise cut through the darkness. A guttural, wet exhale. Not human. The bear's growl deepened, its massive form stepping between Daniel and the deeper part of the cave. Its claws flexed, its fur bristling. It was ready to fight. Daniel didn't wait to see what was coming. Clutching the girl tighter, he sprinted toward the entrance, his boots sliding over damp rock, his breath ragged. The bear moved with him, its presence a shadow at his side, but the sound behind them grew closer. Something was following them. Daniel didn't dare look back. The cave was closing in, the suffocating darkness clawing at his senses. Then light, the dim glow of the forest outside. Hope surged through his chest as he pushed forward. Just a few more steps. A hand shot out from the darkness. Daniel barely had time to react before icy fingers clamped around his ankle, yanking him backward. He stumbled, barely managing to keep hold of the girl. His head snapped down, and for the first time, he saw it. A face. Or at least, what had once been a face. The figure crouched just beyond the cave's mouth, its skin stretched too tight over a gaunt, hollow skull. Its eyes were pits of darkness, its lips torn and raw, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too jagged. The fingers gripping his ankle were skeletal, the nails broken and caked with something dark. Daniel's stomach lurched. This wasn't a man. Not anymore. The bear roared. The deafening sound shook the cave walls, reverberating through Daniel's bones. The creature recoiled, its grip loosening just enough for Daniel to kick free. He didn't hesitate. He bolted. The moment they were outside, the bear whirled, its massive form blocking the cave entrance. It let out another roar, this one even more furious, more primal. Daniel didn't stop running. The girl in his arms was barely conscious, her breathing shallow, but he had no choice but to push forward. The forest was a blur, trees twisting into indistinct shapes as he sprinted. The girl's weight in his arms was nothing compared to the fear coursing through him. He had to get out. He had to get her to safety. Behind him, the cave entrance shuddered as if something unseen had slammed against it. Then, silence. Daniel didn't stop until they reached the riverbank, his legs burning, his chest heaving. He collapsed to his knees, cradling the girl. The bear emerged a few moments later, its breath heavy, its fur bristling. It turned, staring back toward the forest, as if ensuring nothing had followed them. Daniel swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. His mind reeled. What had he just seen? The girl stirred weakly. He kept me there. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Daniel's blood ran cold. Who? Her eyes fluttered open, and in them he saw something that made his stomach twist. Not just fear. Memories. He wasn't always like that, she murmured. He used to be my dad. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. His gaze snapped back to the cave, realization sinking in like a stone. That thing, whatever it was, had once been human, had once been a father, had once loved. Something had changed him. Something had twisted him into the monstrous thing in the cave. And Daniel had a horrible, gnawing feeling. It wasn't the only one. The bear let out a final huff, shaking its massive head. Then, as if satisfied with its duty, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest. Daniel held the girl tighter, his mind racing. He didn't know what had happened in that cave. He didn't know what the bear had saved them from. But one thing was certain. Something was lurking in these woods. And it wasn't done hunting.